Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at the conference. It's my great pleasure to be talking to all of you. And I'm going to talk about the possibility of making peace in this world and explore the possibility of bringing peace to a world in which there is deep vested interest in war and conflict. It is because of this vested interest that conflict is thriving and is the biggest growth industry, bestowing great wealth to rich countries, smoothing out the bust in the business cycles due to decline in economic activity. Although peace is the most important ingredient that makes life normal, like the previous speaker said, but peace is quite elusive. And although peace is very important, it has a great deal of instrumental value, enabling economic growth and development, leading to improvement in the quality of life and increasing output and employment growth. And this gives rise to increase in incomes and virtuous cycles, causing higher levels of productivity and prosperity to the world. And you have the examples of the golden age in the Western world, where because of peace, there was so much increase in productivity and increase in incomes and prosperity in Europe because of the golden age. But I feel that the Western world is enjoying both the dividends that result from peace in their region and the benefits that accrue from conflicts in third world countries. While the situation in the third world is just the opposite, because third world countries are war theaters where all the battles are fought, and because of that there is so much destruction and death and disruption to production and supply chains and loss of manpower, infrastructure, instability, flight of capital, etc., because of conflicts. These are also resulting in the pillage of natural resources of third world countries, as revealed by pictures of lootings in Iraq and Libya and in Afghanistan. I've done some studies, and using GMM estimates for the developed countries, I find that a 1% increase in conflict increases developed countries' gross domestic product by 7.7%. And it leads to a decline of less developed countries' gross domestic product by 3.8%. Now, what are the impediments to peace? First, the attitude of living beyond your means, particularly in rich countries, Western countries, because most of these Western countries were former colonial powers, and they got used to having standards of living which were much higher than their own resources allowed, because they used to get a lot of colonial transfers from their colonies. And that is why they got used to a higher standard of living. For example, according to Patnaik, there was a transfer of $45 trillion from undivided India to the United Kingdom during the period 1765 to 1938. Similarly, from other colonies and also other colonial powers also were managed to get a lot of colonial transfers from their colonies. But the worrying thing is that these colonial transfers are still continuing. For example, in my paper, I've given examples from Pakistan where huge amounts of money are going out of the country under very respectable names. And I think that these are actually colonial transfers. And similarly, 14 African countries are still paying to France a staggering amount of 440 billion euros per year. They're still sending out to France from these 14 African countries. So rich countries living off resources that do not belong to them is impoverishing the third world countries. And many of these third world countries are already in heavy debt to the international financial institutions. And a major chunk of their resources are going towards servicing these debts. And then in addition, if they are also sending colonial transfers to their former colonial masters, then the amounts are very staggering. So the mindset of enjoying what does not belong to you and living beyond your means is resulting in hegemonic attitudes. Countries are holding on to other countries, other territories, because they feel that those territories are giving some benefits to them. For example, you have the example of Jammu and Kashmir, which is being held on against the wishes of its people by India. Then you have the example of Palestine being held against its wishes by Israel, and there are so many other examples. And what is happening, what is very worrying now is the new world order, which Western countries are now working on, which aims to dismantle the state in third world countries through the use of state to demolish the state. This entails a connivance between rich Western countries and partners in third world countries. And the methodology entails acquiring control over tangible and intangible elements of national power by outside forces. And the same objective is also being pursued through liberalization policies. I remember I went to a conference in Europe some years back in the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008-9, where an economist declared that no matter how much liquidity rich countries inject in their economies, the economies will still remain in the ICU, Western economies. But he said that there is no need for despair, as after a few years, there will be opportunities that will help these countries. So I asked this economist, what about countries that don't have trillions of dollars to invest in their countries? Where will their economies be? Because if you invest trillions of dollars and even then your economies are in the ICU, then what about countries which don't have trillions of dollars? Where will their economies be? So will their economies be melting down? And will these be the opportunities that will be available to rich countries that he talked about? And this is the scenario we are witnessing today. There is breakdown of established order in many countries, third world countries. For example, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. And a lot of this has resulted in massive theft of natural resources and gold reserves of these countries. And although Afghanistan was able to get rid of occupation forces, but Western countries and India haven't given up yet. They're trying to create a serious economic and humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Now, my question is, if the US bails out Afghanistan, it will return to Afghanistan along with its allies. And although regional countries are resourceful, there are countries in the region like China and like the Russian Federation. These are resourceful and powerful countries, but there is a lot of reticence to help Afghanistan. And if that reticence continues, this will facilitate United States, which is an extra regional power, to return to the region. It shows that despite the fall of the US from grace, its nod is still required in the affairs of our region. In Asian affairs, everybody, even big and powerful countries, are still looking towards the United States. And without its nod, nobody is prepared to help even Afghanistan. And it also shows lack of appetite for peace and nudging of forces in Afghanistan to get embroiled in another war. Then if you look at the situation in Pakistan and Turkey and other third world countries, in spite of some of these countries being endowed with natural resources, they're experiencing great economic difficulties. In the past, powerful countries have used the state to demolish the state through imploding countries by diverting their resources towards defense expenditures, resulting in impoverishment and ultimately the meltdown. The same is being attempted to be brought about through diverting the major chunk of revenues towards debt servicing, leading to impoverishment and financial bankruptcy in third world countries. What will be the implication of melting down of vast majority of third world economies on peace? The economic meltdown of third world economies in order to resuscitate sick Western countries will promote more peace or less peace. Now, is it possible to change the mindset of countries now in order to, what sort of methodology we should follow for bringing peace? Now, I've raised this question. Is it possible to change the mindset of countries that have got used to living off other countries? Should we appeal to religion, because some of these are religious countries? So should we appeal to religion and try to instill the fear of God in them? But I don't think that will work, because most of these countries, colonial masters, were countries that believed in God and they believed in the life hereafter. And in spite of that, they committed these atrocities. So I think that will not work. Then another strategy would be to prevent imbalances in military strength in sensitive areas through military buildups. Now, this methodology has been tried in a lot of countries, and it has resulted in preventing wars to some extent, but it has brought prosperity to permanent arms economies, Western world. It has brought a lot of prosperity to them and has resulted in a stalemate and led to massive increase in public debt, as one of my earlier studies with other colleagues show, for countries in South Asia, Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka, and Nepal, and some other fifth country. Therefore, I have proposed indigenization of defense production, as this will not only preempt indebtedness and impoverishment, but also increase the gross domestic product of countries that are fighting. And also it will have another advantage, that if there is interest in armament producing countries to make countries fight with one another, then I think this will dampen their activities, because they know that even if there are conflicts, countries will not be purchasing their arms. So I think this will dampen their efforts. And Pakistan and Turkey are doing that to some extent, but I think this needs to be increased. Then nuclear deterrence could be another way to prevent the ruthless bombings that rich countries have subjected Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya to, and Syria. And finally, my final proposition is some sort of regional security pact with nuclear powers, regional security defense pacts between countries in the region, so as to ensure that countries will not succumb to the powerful countries if they are trying to take them over or take their resources. So finally, I've suggested a regional pact with countries which are nuclear and which could lend their nuclear umbrella to countries which are non-nuclear. Thank you very much.